All right, Richard, I'm excited to dive in with you today. You've got so much experience, I almost don't know where to start. Um, why don't we kick this off with you telling me what you're currently up to, what your current focus is?
Well, Mike, thank you very much for inviting me on the show. My current focus is with Alt 5 Sigma and joined them in May of this year to help the team grow the business exponentially. And Alt 5 has two products, namely Alt 5 Pay, which is a payments gateway for crypto and Bitcoin to fiat and fiat to Bitcoin. And the second product is a white label product called Alt 5 Prime or Pro. And our target market here is essentially any money manager and or financial institution that wishes to offer a digital asset or crypto solution to its clients. So that's really the two products, and they're built by our team, and we launched them in the fourth quarter of 2020.
And you joined fairly recently, so the company, where is the company in terms of the size and
Yeah.
traction?
So the company is a Delaware-based company, head office in New York, with operations in Toronto and Montreal, as well as we have sales teams in Miami, Vegas, and El Salvador. Believe it or not, El Salvador. And we're about 28, 30 people now, and we will continue to add selectively as we grow and add customers.
Yeah. And so the company was started a while ago, right?
Yeah,
I guess.
about 2017. So, we're about
Yeah.
a year and a half, 2 years behind um, the vast majority of the big successes that you see as brand names out there. But I got to tell you, we're catching up pretty fast. And some of the extraordinary successes of, the Coinbases and Geminis, etc., is it's really a testament to human ingenuity and what can be done, and if you put your mind to it. So we're doing the same
Hmm.
thing, but really with an institutional focus. And in terms of geographic focus, um, on the institutional side, it's a little slow in North America. Canada trails the U.S. in terms of adoption rates, but we're finding some very big success in Central and Latin America for a whole variety of reasons.
Hmm. So this is through banking partners down there in Central and South America?
As a matter of fact, we do have a asset management partner, Fisherman Wealth Management in El Salvador, and his platform. He will launch a trading platform very shortly. We're just waiting on final licensing, and that will be extremely exciting. And we have another partnership that we're in the verge of signing. That is a software middleware provider to numerous clients that are large banks in throughout Latin America. So we're working on that agreement as we speak, and we prefer these types of agreements because we end up in a revenue share, but we end up with immediate account penetration, if you know what I mean. It won't take us hopefully 2 years to get in the front door and get a serious contract done. We're hoping that
Hmm.
it will expedite quite radically our client close rates as well as our onboarding time.
Got it, got it. And so the product effectively is for people who are managing money or institutional, so large companies, like I'm picturing a Fidelity or a bank, where people store their money, and then you would be the software that those folks can use. So if a money manager wanted to purchase crypto for one of their clients, they would use a Alt 5 API or
Yeah,
portal. Is that concept?
we have the full APIs for both products on our site, and the answer to your question is yes. But Fidelity would not be a good example. A good example or better example would be Raymond James, for instance, which is a fabulous institution, brokerage firm, investment bank, and they've been around for years. And they're currently not offering any digital assets to their clients, to the best of my knowledge. And we can do essentially a plug and play and get them in the business on a vastly reduced timeline. And their choice is really, do they build it themselves or do they partner with someone like us? And if they want to build it themselves, as you know, large organizations can tend to have a longer delays, longer timeline, and it usually costs more when we build it ourselves. And in our case, it's already built. Plus, we have some very exciting attributes to our platform. We have multiple liquidity providers. So we have a best order routing system in terms of price, and we have about 8 or 10 liquidity providers, and we're adding more almost every month or two. And that provides some very deep liquidity in terms of the bid and ask and the ability to move size. So if you wanted to move, $10,000 worth of Bitcoin versus $10 million worth of Bitcoin, we can certainly accommodate the 10 million.
Gotcha.
Without too much market friction, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I think I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So you joined. Why? What was the situation like? I'm curious. Whenever founders or executive teams switch, was it a pivot in the company or?
No, it's a long story. I guess because of my securities background, one of the founders is a friend of mine, and he was asking me, would you be interested? And, I'm a fiat guy. So I'm I guess I'm the oldest guy on our team. I'm 63, but I still barefoot water ski. So watch out. Yeah. And we'll talk about that offline. But so I joined in May, and I was not, a Bitcoin or crypto aficionado. I sat down with my wife, who's a CPA, and I sat down with her maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and we looked at the whole story and said, why don't we invest in some Bitcoin? But at the end of the day, we decided not to, for security reasons and for compliance reasons. That's what I'm trained for in terms of my 30 years plus in the investment banking world. So we missed the boat. And I see all these.
You in it now?
I see all these 20 and 25-year-old multimillionaires everywhere. Mike, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. The transformation of wealth to the younger generation is something that is just outstanding. I've never seen anything like it. And
do you say that with reserve? I mean, do you feel like some spite?
I think it's great.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
When I was 20 years old, I was at McGill University working at the CIBC Visa Center for $6 or $7 an hour on weekends to pay my way through school, and being a waiter and a busboy at the same time. So, no, I think this is great. I mean, I can share some words of wisdom at the end of the discussion if you'd like. But and so I joined in May, and quickly have had a learning curve. I wake up at 4 a.m. now because I can't sleep. There's just too much going on in my head, and it's absolutely extraordinary with what's going on in the digital world. We're living through a revolution of finance, and you have the old world, which is the fiat world, right, where I'm from, and then you have the new world, which is the digital asset world and the DeFi world and the DAO world. It's just incredible what's going on, and it will transform many industries, and it will improve many industries, like letters of credit. When you're buying goods, shipments from overseas, the whole LC process is absolutely crazy. the whole bank wire process is absolutely crazy. Waiting for 3, 4, 5 days for a bank wire and being charged $45 each way, to me, it makes absolutely no sense.
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah, totally agree. But of course, those are the constraints with what that system had at the
Correct.
time, and it only seems crazy. And yeah, yeah. So walk me through how you think about this transition for larger financial companies. Is this obviously you can't pivot a large, multi-billion dollar banking or fintech company even in a
Right.
year is incredibly difficult. Do you think, what do you tend to think about the most? Is it how to convince these organizations that this is inevitable and they need to adopt it, or are they more or less fully on board at this point, just trying to figure it out?
Mike, it's I think it's all over the map, actually. You have the early adopters, which are, the Goldman Sachs, the JP Morgans, the Citigroups, etc., and Fidelity, by the way. Um, they're offering an interesting array of products. Most of them are to accredited investors only. And then, of course, you have the ETFs, which are having some are being approved and some are not being approved in the US. In Canada, we had one of our ETF trailblazers who had to sue the Ontario Securities Commission to get the prospectus seriously reviewed. They refused to review the prospectus. And finally, they won. And so
Wait,
they're now managing north
what
of
happened?
$3 billion
The company who created the
of
ETF
digital assets.
couldn't even get the government to approve or even review it to approve?
Correct. The, the Securities Commission, the Ontario Securities Commission would not approve the prospectus. So he actually took them to court and said, "You're being prejudicial. We've fulfilled everything that you need."
Well,
And
that's a
finally, they
good sign.
won, and the prospectus was approved.
Yeah.
That's a very good sign. So the regulators across the board, for the vast majority of cases, are trying to get their heads around what's going on, and it's not easy sometimes because we're all used to the same way of doing business with the same types of assets. So there's a learning curve for everyone, and that's what's going on now. Coming back to your question on the financial institutions and how fast can you move and change course, it really depends on ultimately the regulations. And if as and when either the SEC or the Commodity Bureau end up regulating digital assets and crypto, we obviously seen some things happen with coins and the definition of a security. But we're now I call it an arbitration gap. We're in a zone that's a gray zone for the most part, where a lot of the banks and financial institutions don't want to move
Right.
until there's clarity on the regulations. Okay? And so in the meantime, and going back to the Goldmans and the Citi groups, they're offering product on a accredited investor basis only. They're not offering it to most of them are accredited anyways at Goldman Sachs, right? But that's another discussion. So the vast majority of financial institutions are in what we call research mode and gathering information mode. And we have signed a federally chartered bank in the United States, and we've done basically a full integration with them. And they're ready to go in the first quarter of 2022. And that will be an extraordinary situation when they're ready to launch. And I think the only tweak that have to do is on the compliance side, but everything should be good to go by now.
And how many, if you had to throw a percentage as just a ballpark guess, of these banks are capable of, whether it's through Alt5 or some other service out there, are capable of integrating with crypto? Is it like, are we at a 0.1% or 5% or 10?
I would say let's take the financial institution category and break it down, Mike, and we'll start with the broker dealers. So in the United States, there's about 3,500 broker dealers. Each one of them could offer, and we could integrate with each one of them for digital assets and the trading platforms. With respect to the state banks and federal banks, our experience so far is that the larger the bank, the more interest they have, and the smaller the bank, the less interest they have. Unless there's a new change of management or a new bank that has been created with a brand new licensing for digital assets. There's some brand new banks being created now in Wyoming and Puerto Rico that are strictly and solely focused on the digital world, which is
The crypto
incredible.
world?
Yeah,
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. That's
yeah.
awesome. That's definitely, and they'll go through the same licensing process as other banks, so they can call themselves a bank, but they just won't have fiat connection to
Well, it
the wire.
depends. It depends on what they're doing. If it's a B2C bank, business to consumer, or a B2B bank, and it also depends if they're a state bank or a federally chartered bank. Each case will be different, and then it'll depend on their business model. Some of the B2Bs may not want our trading platform because they don't want to be in the trading business, right? They just want to be in the banking business and bringing bringing in crypto and sending out fiat, for example. You know,
Mm, yeah, interesting. I'm with you on this.
so
So
everything is
yeah,
changing,
yeah,
Mike. Everything is changing, and it's changing rapidly, extremely rapidly. I started in 1984, maybe before you were born, on the floor of the Montreal Stock Exchange as a trader. And we didn't have any computers, and we had the old-fashioned phones, like with the cords,
yeah. I've
And
seen it.
we had pink tickets over here, we had blue tickets over there. And so, I was, just out of McGill, and I was getting a training salary of $100 a month that didn't even pay my bus fare, obviously, or my lunches. But it was quite an experience. And in 6 months, I got my license, and then I moved upstairs to be a research analyst and institutional salesperson. So it was the best experience of learning how the theory of crowd movements happen. And also, we didn't need computers to figure out who was doing the insider trading. We just had to look at where all the blue and pink tickets were coming from, and I'd say, "What's going on?" to my bosses, and they said, "Oh, this company must have some news coming out, and all the insiders are buying on insider news." So that's how
Oh,
I
wow,
learned about not to do insider trading.
wow, huh?
So we
What?
didn't need computers to figure that one out.
Yeah. Um, what do you think about that? I mean, just as a concept for a moment. So insider trading being the concept that there's a what would you call it? Like a moral
Privileged,
wrongdoing.
privileged information. It's terrible. People shouldn't do it. And
Right.
you know, the digital asset world is not regulated, right? I could show you a dozen cases or more of insider trading where people are
Yeah.
trading the coins and they know everything that's going on, whereas poor guy next door knows nothing about what's going on.
Yeah. 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 It
That's
almost
one of the
seems.
reasons. That's one of the reasons why you need some regulation.
Well, I mean, just even remove the concept of like a company and then a person running it and then disclosing that information. From an abstract sense, insider information is a desire to have a free market where people can purchase stocks, companies, and sell those based on how they how they perceive the company's future to look, and having equal access to information for everyone that can participate in that exchange is critical to the health of the exchange. Let's just take it from the exchange perspective, because
Yeah.
if you didn't, and there was just, imagine what would happen, for instance, just playing devil's advocate, if you remove that rule entirely. You say, okay, you know, do whatever you want. There's no rule on insider trading. People would tell their friends, it's largely relationship driven, so that it would become more tribal. It would become more
Yeah.
relationship driven, favor driven. I'll tell you an insider scoop, and then you do me this favor. Yeah.
It becomes a free
which
for
is kind of
all,
like where
Mike.
crypto is now. And
It would
I'm like,
become a free for
where
all.
can I identify the
And
problem in the free for all in the crypto market today? Is it the fact that there's people out there trying to pump
yeah,
and dump? They're getting together in private Telegram groups. They're all buying at the same time. Other outside people buy it, and then insider is the people in the group know when to sell, and then the
yeah.
people who bought on the outside are screwed. And it's like
That's going on. That's going on every day.
that is. I almost think there's a countermeasure that happens though, because you start to realize that this is happening, so you don't participate in the stocks in the same way. Maybe the argument against insider trading from a systemic level is that it overall decreases the liquidity in the market because people have higher risk that aren't in one of these private groups. It's like if you don't have inside information, then you're at a disadvantage, which is
Yep.
it's kind of interesting to think how it'll play out in the crypto world.
Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah,
Time will tell.
yeah,
The next 6 to 18 months, we should have some regulation in the United States, and the United States will lead the rest of the world.
yeah.
But I noticed on the NFT side, Japan has come out recently and said NFTs are not a security. NFTs are an investment of of um, of an asset nature that is not a security. So I found that very, very interesting with what's going on with NFTs.
What is the concern with the security? So the security is obviously it's a touchy word because it comes with a lot of
Well, there's
baggage, so to
coins
speak.
being
What's your
issued all over the
take on it?
world, and some of them are reviewed in a prospectus, but and approved by a securities regulator to a minimum standard of quality and trust, and most of them are not. And so, if you have millions of dollars or hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of a coin that has been issued without a prospectus, no one really knows the whole story. And so you can get nefarious that are not necessarily the most ethical people in the world. And that's where the regulators are concerned, and rightfully so, right? It's
Yeah, yeah. So there's a
yeah.
real
And
valuable
being
part
transparent
that
about
regulation
who owns
plays
what,
in
who paid for what,
legitimizing
how many
the
founders
tokens
are
that
there, how
yeah get
much did they
printed.
pay, what is their escrow? Like, there's no escrow in some of these original founders coin issued. So if all sorts of great news comes out and the coin goes from 1 cent to $5, well, what happened to the guys that got all the coins at 0.001 cent? Are they escrowed? Are they allowed to sell at 5? Sure, they're not escrowed, but they'll probably
Hmm.
sell at 5, right? So that's the concern from a regulatory point of view
Yeah,
about the
yeah.
coins being issued. But that's one of many concerns. Never mind the governance of if there's a board of directors and the management team and how people are paid. So when there's no prospectus filed, there's no disclosure for the most part on these items. I think so. I think
Hmm.
it's going to be
And ultimately,
follow the
Canada will be
leader.
waiting for the U.S. to make a move,
It'll
I
be
would
the
imagine.
U.S. in the next, it could be 3 months, it could be 2 months, it could be January. We don't know, right? Um, but my guess is that gray zone, they'll try to shrink the gray
Hmm.
zone as fast as possible so that they can get some regulation in place and more clarity for the bigger institutions. Coming back to your question, but I was just going to say, sorry, Mike. If you're
Yeah,
a
and I
bank or an
imagine.
asset manager or a mutual fund manager or a hedge fund manager, and your clients or your broker dealer, and your clients are saying, Mike, I'd like to buy $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, and you tell me, sorry, Rick, we're not set up. we cannot buy $100,000 worth of Bitcoin. We can't trade it. We have no idea how to do that. There's no system here. But you have all my assets. You have $500,000 of my assets. I like to put, 100,000 into Bitcoin. It's probably too much, but let's just leave it at that. And you're going to say to your broker, well, I want to buy it. I've talked to my wife and my partner, or my partner, and we would like you to send us $100,000 on a bank wire to my bank account, and I'm going to go buy it somewhere else. Right? That's what's going on. So you have these massive successful
and that's what's
exchanges
happening today.
and
Yeah.
Retail
Yep.
houses, Voyager, Coinbase, Kraken, to name a few, Gemini. But the asset manager is seeing what I call asset slippage. And the asset slippage is now quite substantial. It's, largely between the 20 and 40-year-old age group. But when it comes to my age group, it could be very substantive. And more people of my age are saying, okay, I guess I should throw in the towel and, buy 1 or 2 or 3% of my portfolio in digital assets and buy a basket. That's what I see people doing now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it makes sense. I think there's probably more pressure too with inflation, people feeling like they want to diversify more as things become more expensive.
Yeah.
And obviously, crypto makes a run, and then people get excited and they buy it at the high, or maybe not, but it does draw a lot of attention to it. I dig it. It makes perfect sense. I mean, effectively, you're taking market share from
Yeah.
the exchanges, you're giving it to the traditional fintech companies that are
Correct.
managing money and making it easier for people so
But
they don't
then
have
you
to
have
split up and have their money in different places,
unexpected
which is, yeah, big value add.
surprises. And so, for instance, Mike, we were at the Vegas show a few weeks ago, the Money 2020 show. I mean, my gosh, everyone that we met hadn't been out in almost 2 years. So everyone was very excited to be out of the house. I can tell you that right now. So for the most part, yeah, it was very impressive.
How did they do it? Was everyone wearing masks?
So an unexpected consequence of what's going on, we had this gentleman come up to us at the show, I think at 4 or 5 o'clock near closing time. And he says, do you guys can you transfer Bitcoin into fiat? And we said, sure, we've got a product called Alt5 Pay. And I said, what are you looking for? And so he said, can I sit down? And we sat down at our booth. And he said, I run a travel agency. It's an online multi-level travel agency. And all of my clients are wealthy people in Latin America. I said, oh, that's very interesting. He says, of course, because of COVID, my business is down 50%, but it's starting to come back. And next year in 2022, I think I'll do, between X and X plus 2. And it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So we said, absolutely. What's the problem? And he said, well, 30% or more of my clients want to pay me in Bitcoin. I said, really? I would never have guessed. And he says, yeah, because they're coming from Argentina, they're coming from Peru, Chile, Bolivia, Brazil, and most of those countries have very high inflation, like Argentina's 40 to 50%, and their currencies are not doing well at all. So, in North America, Mike, we take for granted, our very low inflation. Yes, it's up. I mean, I buy barbecue chicken from my mom once a week, and the chicken went from $6 to $12 in the past 4 months. So yeah, there's inflation everywhere. Never mind the gas prices, but we're not seeing 50% inflation. So when you see, yeah, in the case of the chicken, but I think it was also a supply chain
Wouldn't that
issue,
be 100% inflation if they doubled?
which is part of everyone's problem right now, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Exactly. So
I'd rather
go
take the
back into
supply
Latin
chain problem because
America
at
for a
least
sec.
that's temporary. It
And
feels like
this
you can fix
gentleman,
that.
he's running this travel agency, and of course he's based in Miami. And we had him for an hour, and we shook hands, and we signed him up last week. And so if he's doing 150 million and 30% of his clients, that's $45 million a year, and that's a $500,000 client for us. And and that came out of the blue, and they were not in our sort of
It's awesome.
targeted vertical markets. So we're now looking at
Yeah.
all of the
Yeah.
online travel agencies around the world as potential clients.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds like a really smart idea. What do you think about this inflation? Do you think that I don't know if you've dove into the situation down in South America. I don't even know really what caused it. If it was just a collection of bad political fiscal policies or if there's something else going on. But I'm curious if you have a take
You mean
on
in Canada and
what
the US?
inflation, what inflationary situation we're currently in, or how to make sense of it. Yeah, yeah, and I think of Canada and the US in comparison to, say, South America or places that have managed it better. Is it to say, hey, we're doing the best with what we can? The US, it's a good idea to have printed 6 trillion or whatever, how many trillions of dollars we spent, and that dampens out the negative economic impact of a pandemic, and it's just the price you pay. Or if sometimes I just feel that hey, we're making a big mistake collectively. We're kicking the can down the road and it's going to be 10 times worse later.
Excuse me. So the
But I
inflation,
also
my
have no
response
idea
on the
what I'm talking
inflation,
about.
Mike,
So
would
I'm
be
curious if
it's very
you have a take.
complicated. And the first place I would stop and look is the port of Los Angeles and all the ports on the western seaboard. They're all a logistical nightmare for the most part, and the goods and services that are being held up, um, you know, they're talking. Many companies are not going to be able to receive their shipments as planned for Christmas. Um, Plus, the price of the containers in shipping have gone out of control in terms of leasing them for the duration on the ship. And then you have the whole COVID situation that apparently has exasperated and caused a lot of these supply issues. And when you have shortage of supply, you have hoarding. Well, I still can't figure out why there was hoarding of toilet paper last year. I just that totally is
Mm.
beyond my comprehension. I don't
Toilet
get it.
paper? Yeah,
But when you have scarcity of assets, you have hoarding, and people go
yeah,
and buy more
yeah,
than they need. And what does that do? That empties the shelves and it raises the prices. Okay, so it's a real chain domino reaction, like dong dong dong. Everything falls, and I think that's where we're at right now. Then on top of that, you've got the stimulus program in Canada and the U.S. for COVID, and we're paying people $1,500 to $2,500 a month to stay home because they may have COVID. Well, I think it's frankly absolutely ridiculous. I mean, every single business that I've seen in Canada and the US in the past six
yeah.
months is starved for uh, willing, able employees. And I was just out for breakfast with a client this morning. That
Employees.
breakfast place is closed. Why? Shortage of employees. I just about fell off my chair. I couldn't believe it. Yeah.
And are they, is the
No, no,
government,
no,
is
no.
Canada still
It's a
giving out
blank check.
checks to people? And is
It's a
the
blank
check
check.
come when you get
Yeah.
COVID? So there's actually okay.
Yeah. So it not everybody, but
Yeah, it
a
just
lot of people.
comes, it's just for
And so
everyone gets free money.
there's a gap of people wanting
Yeah.
to work. It's just I think it's 1,500 to 2,000 a month. I don't know.
And are they getting that
I've
every
never
month? Is it
actually
1,500
received
every
it.
month?
Thank God. But some people,
Wow, that's
but
pretty
some
good.
people need it,
I mean
and
that,
I respect that, and I
yeah,
understand that. But
yeah.
a lot of people
That
don't need it.
certainly,
There's always the outliers. I know people with $1 million in their bank account that are getting $2,000 a month from the
yeah,
government. It's absolutely ridiculous, right?
yeah. Well, this is kind of it
Yeah,
feels like, I don't know. I love trying to make sense of these things first and try to understand the challenge. And it feels like the challenge to me is that in a society, there's in a healthy society, we'll call it, or decently healthy, there's the vast
yeah,
majority of people who can contribute willingly to the economic situation in whatever way that they desire to do that. And then there are some people that are either between jobs,
hmm,
financially, and they're just it made a few bad bets, but they're fully capable of getting back into the market.
yeah,
And then there's people who are incapable of contributing. They're mentally ill, physically disabled, so much
hmm,
so. And I think those two groups, and you could probably put the elderly without any savings in that category as well. So maybe those two or three groups are the ones
hmm.
are the ones that drive the whole
No,
free money
no,
argument, because you don't want to live in
yeah,
a society where people are down in their luck or they're incapable and they're just dying or starving and on homeless. And so we give it out. I think the universal aspect is probably wrong. Like there
mm,
has to be some deterministic mechanism for figuring out who would deserve this, who is actually eligible to receive it, and that
mm,
is where the friction comes, because it's almost like you can't ever
yeah,
optimize that entirely, because any optimization game the government's going to play, there's going to be people who outsmart it, and so
right.
it's like something you have to tolerate. Maybe 10% of people who abuse the system, and just say the best society is an inefficient
Well,
but mostly functional one. Um,
we've Canada
I
have
don't know.
been
I don't know if
talking
you've
about
thought
it,
about this at all, but I find the universal
and
income interesting.
to the best of my knowledge, it's still being talked about, and it's a good thing to talk about this because I'm not necessarily against it, but I'm not necessarily for it because it's an extremely complicated subject, right? What is the best thing to do? But I can tell you, capitalism I think is better than communism, and then there's the question of what about the benevolent dictatorships in the world, and that takes us far out from our discussion on digital assets. But look at what Dubai has accomplished, and I'm not a fan of some of their policies and some of their laws, obviously, but they get things done. And you know, when we want to do a bridge here, I mean, it takes 10 or 15 years. It's
Yeah, it's
ridiculous
functional.
um, to get everything done properly. So, uh, we're in the G7 or
Mm.
G10, whatever you want to call us. Um, it's a challenge to get things done now because of not only the regulations but the red tape and the special interest groups that don't want something to happen.
Yeah, yeah. It does seem like if you have an absolutely united effort, you know,
Yeah,
benevolent dictator, as you say, you're going to just make progress. China can build a hospital in 3 days,
yeah,
where in a free market there may just be more resistance, competition, red tape to go through, where you can just wipe all that away if the person in charge says let's do it. It's like the United States having 50 states and 50 different regulatory bodies for financial payments and financial licenses is slow, but that elasticity or that slowness builds resilience. So you can't. It's less likely. So take even COVID. It's less likely that the U.S., I think, is going to make a countrywide poor decision, because largely the decision is on the state level. So we see, how
right.
did California do? How did Oregon do? How did Texas, Florida, New York? How did they each do? They took different philosophical stances. And ideally, we can look at the numbers and hopefully have trust in numbers and say this was actually a better approach. And I think play it out long enough, and that works out. So splitting countries up into multiple states, I think was probably the best thing we ever did as Americans, or the United States founders ever did. Um, but yeah, I hear you. I wonder, I think of capitalism less as capitalism and more of
Mm,
just what you do when there's no system overriding it. It's like, okay, you and I want to do business together. You trade me your piece of software, I give you some money. You can sell a house, you trade whatever you
yeah.
want, and we label that as capitalism. But it's just people exchanging goods and services freely, and then we layer on regulation, we layer on rules about who you can trade with, and that becomes less free market and more kind of centralized control, to the point where it's, you have the government telling everyone what to do, and like you say, communists. And I think that clearly we had to have come out of the 20th century saying that doesn't work. You
Right.
can't tell people what to do and pay everyone equally, because people's brains operate differently. We're
But
wired differently, which is
then
the absolute
very good point. But
most beautiful
then
part
you
about
have,
humanity.
you know,
So
you have the
yeah,
pure
it's my rant.
capitalism, capitalists, and then you have, the evolution of something called the B Corp, right? Um, which is sort of capitalism, but with a social
Right.
conscience. And I think we all need, I mean, I'm not going to tell everybody what to do, but I think that is a great example that instills a greater accountability for all of us towards our environment, our neighbors, our friends, our associates, the animals, the air, the environment in general. That we shouldn't be destroying the environment the way we've done it. And yes, oil and fossil fuels are, I guess, proven to be a contributing factor to global warming and causing havoc. I mean, in Canada as well as the United States, the amount of storms, fires, and rain floods that we've had in the past 6 to 12 months is just off the charts, right? In British Columbia, just north of you, has been suffering big
Yeah.
time from these atmospheric rain clouds that have come in and given them dumps and dumps of rain. It's extraordinary. So the B Corps and the social consciousness as part of a capitalist structure, I think, is the way to go. Um, I mean, I don't know if you saw recently, but there was a whole bunch of articles on LinkedIn about whales contributing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and there were some stats that were done. I mean, we'd have to plant one or 2 billion trees to make the equivalent greenhouse GHG reduction from the amount of whales that are killed every year and harvested by humans. So, and it's really, there's some amazing stats on LinkedIn from various members. So, ask yourself the question: do we
Yeah.
really need to harvest whales? Like, maybe part of our global warming
Yeah.
situation can be solved with just letting the whales live. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think of the B Corp as
Yeah.
where you go from where you left off is, what do you do with it? You have this optional corporate structure that companies can adopt. And I effectively look at it as a stamp of marketing for companies that say, hey, we're gonna, as one of our fiduciary duties, the board is going to consider the economic impact of the greater good.
Yeah.
And why does that matter? Well, consumers prioritize that. I think millennial, Gen Z would rank, along with price, quality, economic impact, as one of the major factors. I know from just being in that generation that it's a
Yeah.
big decision. If you're buying food, especially, you're thinking about what was the impact that this animal had, buying free range. People love the health implications of it, but they're also concerned. And I think this is a socioeconomic progression. And there's a study I heard recently of they did in India where they looked at the economic rising of people. So they took average monthly incomes and then they asked them a survey of what matters most to you. And as people make more money, they care farther out. So
Yeah.
they're making very, very little. If they're poor, they're just concerned about rent this week and food this week. If they have enough to say 6 months to a year, they're like, okay, I'm thinking about my kids. If it's, I have, plenty of money for my lifetime, I'm thinking about generations. I'm thinking about the planet. I'm thinking, so as abundance becomes more prolific, more, more available to everyone, then we think. And I think my thought is that this is the missing narrative in the climate change conversation, because you can't change. I know for a fact that people who are concerned paycheck to paycheck are just never going to care, statistically speaking. Certainly there are individuals, but your incentives are yourself
And
first, your family,
Mike,
your friend group,
my
and you play that
sweater
outward
is a
in centric
Patagonia
circles.
sweater.
So
It's made
yeah,
from recycled material, right? So
yeah,
100%.
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah,
And part of it is a brand. Like
exactly.
Richard knows when he buys that sweater that
Yeah,
he is associated with that idea. If you're,
right.
it's and you want to be associated with that because you want to move us in the right direction. So I think that's a perfect
They've
example.
done an
I don't know if
amazing job. I don't know
Patagonia
if
is
they're
a
a
B
B
Corp
Corp
or
or not
not,
either,
but
but
it doesn't need to
I
be because
love
they've
what they
made their
stand
mission
for,
very
and
clear.
I'll always favor their products, Water.
Yeah,
The other
yeah.
thing
Um,
water.
what are other things
So
that you think about? I mean, you
we've
had
done a lot of work on water over the years.
extensive,
I've
yeah.
financed many different types of water companies and purification companies, but really, the I came to many conclusions with some of our associates and partners that we work with on projects, and the world's water problem is, I think, solvable with atmospheric water, and the the problem is there's not enough water, and it's evaporating very quickly
What is the
as the
problem?
climate gets warmer, and consequently, in atmospheric water, we can, with a 20% humidity, you can actually take water out of the air. So in cities where there's water stress, let's talk about Cape Town, let's talk about Manila. I mean, you can name 100 cities. There's there's no need, in my opinion, to go through massive water rationing in the cities, and we have another discussion on in the country, um, because there's atmospheric water machines that can even be powered by solar that can take water out of the atmosphere. Number one, and you can purify it with a couple of filters, and you're good to go. And so
Hmm.
there are retail solutions to that for cities. And then going into the country, there's agricultural solutions as well as solutions for each village. And you can actually, there are actually atmospheric water machines in Kenya and other countries in Africa that are run by a family in a village, and they're feeding the village with fresh, clean water. And we are absolutely, with the exception of certain places in North America, be it on a native reserve, which I find incredible why they still have water problems and boil water advisories, but and with the exception of certain cities that have worn out water systems and pipes that are leaking and rusted. North Americans are very spoiled when it comes to water. And when you look at what's happening in Latin America, certain parts of Asia, and of course Africa, it just breaks your heart. There's no reason why these people should be dying of no water or drinking terribly contaminated water. So, and there are all sorts of economic solutions to this. And so you know, when
Hmm. How about I was going to
I
ask you,
think
what do
I
you
think
think
the
about
energy consumption on
desalination for
desalination
cities in
is
particular
very
on the
high,
coastline?
and um, it when you desalinate the water,
Yeah.
there are no more nutrients left in the water when you drink it. Um, so it serves a purpose, but I don't think it's the final solution. It's definitely a solution for mass volumes today, but longer term, I think it will stay a solution, but it's not the solution that we need to feed, a billion plus people that are malnutrition, that suffer from malnutrition and are water starved. And it's a big problem.
Hmm. Just yeah, I mean, knowing very little about the subject, just seeing these giant oceans,
Yeah.
it would seem like a system to just convert that was being that so many people live on the coastline and there's, infinite supply of water, but it has salt in it.
But
Um,
the air
yeah,
has
but
the
I guess if
water
it's
too.
energy intensive or if we're not very efficient at it, it seems so simple.
Oh yeah. We've got white papers from
Yeah.
all sorts
And
of
what does it
brilliant
have
scientists that,
enough? I mean, do you have
you
any
know,
idea?
you could take
Really?
um, X number of pounds or square inches of water out of the atmosphere, and it won't even make a dent. So I think we're good for at least a billion or 2 billion people. Yeah. No, as long as you're
Probably
over twenty
harder
percent
in desert
humidity, it
environments.
can
Vegas
work.
is not pulling out water from the air.
Generally, most machines will work.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting solution.
Yeah. So I imagine it's yeah. Yeah, yeah. I know Charity Water is one of the first charities I donated to and I got excited
And
about because it
Mike, there's
does
tons of
seem
coins
like that's
that
the most
have been
important
issued
thing. Malaria.
around water. When we did our research report on this summer, or during the spring, we were astounded to see the number of water coins that have been issued, and the technical innovation that's coming from the digital world in trying to solve human problems is absolutely extraordinary. It's impressive, very impressive.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And is
and
the
to use
concept
the
there
coins
to generate money that
to
goes to
create a
people who
currency,
need
there's
water?
multiple coins in water that have been issued, and so each one is a little different. But it's exciting to see the creativity coming, and some of them are working well. So you may want to have a look at that, and I'd be pleased to introduce you to some of the people that are doing some extraordinary work uh, in Africa on the water side of the business because they're helping people, and that's what it's all about, right? We're not here by ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me, there was a buddy of mine who has a website when I was living in Boston that would show you, it plotted all the springs, the natural springs. So I think they were trying to raise money or they had um, a vision to allow people who own natural springs to bottle up the water and sell the water. So you could just, drive
Mm-hmm.
down the street, go fill up at the tap. It has a measuring device on it, or somehow it tracks it. You pay for it, but you can just get it straight out of the ground. It's pretty grassroots at this
It's
point,
cool,
but it
very
does
cool.
does make a lot of sense. It's
Yeah,
if you own the spring, you don't have to worry about water. I guess it has to be
it depends on
filtered.
the
I
city.
don't know if you can just drink water straight out of the ground in cities, but Yeah. Interesting problem. Depends on the city. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Awesome, man. So you're looking forward with Alt 5 and you're now running the ship. Um, one thing I want to ask you is how do you run the company? Are there things that you've learned or techniques, things that you
Hmm.
value especially highly? I'm talking about, say, do you weekly all hands
Yeah.
meetings or setting OKRs
So,
or
and
any of those things stand
nobody
out to
likes a
you as
benevolent dictator,
having
okay?
worked?
And so what I've found over the years is you really need a team. So we're building a team, and it's not just me; it's the whole team, and we've got some just fantastic people on our team, and we continue to add great people. We just added a young man in Newport Beach who is a hedge fund trader, and he knows more about trading crypto than most of us, and he's brought extraordinary value to the table. Um, so he's in the West Coast, and he's helping us out with a variety of things, including trading, demos, marketing, videos, as well as customer support, and um, also introductions to family offices and institutions on the West Coast. Um, so we also have added key people in compliance and onboarding, as well as sales and accounting. And if you have bad accounting, the whole thing falls apart, right? So you can't have bad accounting. You need really good
Yeah,
accounting. So,
yeah, yeah, totally.
well, no, we have people in Toronto, and we have people in
Are you
in
totally remote
Miami,
or
and
is it
people in
in person?
Montreal, and one person in New York. COVID has sort of put a couple of curveballs to us, but we're making do. So, in answer to your question, my teamwork is really important, and there's the way I view things. There's no one person that's more important than the other. So, if I need to take a garbage can out, I'm going to do it. If I need to change the water in the coffee machine, I'm going to do it. Like this hierarchy stuff that you
Hmm.
know many people were brought up with. It's as far as I'm concerned, it's out the window. Um, and so the other thing is we do have a weekly all hands
Yeah.
meeting every week, Friday at noon, and for the whole vast majority of the team, and we go through what happened in that week, the good, the bad, and if there's any ugly, and we review each department and communicate because the toughest thing in COVID is really communicating, right? And I'm not necessarily a fan of communicating all the time on email because we're emailed out and we're actually zoomed out. I think I've had like 500 Zoom calls
Hmm.
since I joined in May, and I can't
Yeah.
take any more Zoom calls.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, soon
So
enough, you'll
it's
have
it's
the
really
the
creating a
the
team.
VR headset on, and you
Whether
can
it's a
just do it
baseball team,
in the
hockey
metaverse.
team, or
That'll solve
football
all your
team.
problems.
You know, the quarterback and the coach is nothing without the rest of the players. And so, the only message I can leave your listeners is just be part of a team and maybe be the chief cheerleader, and be easy with criticism because everyone makes mistakes. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Wise words right there. Well, Richard, congrats on all the
Thank you
progress
so
over
much.
your
Thank you
career
so
and
much,
with
Mike.
Alt
Look forward
5
to
here,
seeing you
and
again.
wish you guys best of luck.
Okay.
So thanks for coming on today. All right.